It's time for the Longines Chronoscope, a television journal of the important issues of the hour, brought to you every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. A presentation of the Longines Whitnor Watch Company, maker of Longines, the world's most honored watch, and Whitnor, distinguished companion to the world-honored Longines.
Good evening. This is David Ross. May I introduce our co-editors for this edition of the Longines Chronoscope, Mr. William Bradford Huie and Mr. Henry Hazlitt. Our distinguished guest for this evening is Mr. Dan A. Kimball, Secretary of the Navy.
Mr. Secretary, we're very happy to have you with Chronoscope this evening. I'd like to begin by asking you what you think of General Eisenhower's statement about a truce in Korea. He said that if the Chinese communists don't want a truce now, we've got to give them something to, we've got to do some of the things to induce them to want a truce. Now, what do you think some of those things might be?
Well, Mr. Hazlitt, I didn't read General Eisenhower's statements today, but General Eisenhower said we should give the Chinese communists something to want a truce. I'm for that. Now, there's two or three ways you can do it. One by force of arms and one by force of persuasion. We haven't done very well in the force of persuasion for the last year and a half. Maybe we should have the force of arms. Maybe we should try again the force of persuasion. That decision is in General Eisenhower's lap, and I'm sure he'll make a good one.
What specific steps do you think we ought to take? Do you think we ought to reconsider, for example, the neutralization of Formosa?
You know, I'm not a military expert, so I wouldn't tell General Eisenhower and Admiral Bradford and General Mark Clark what they should do. I just don't think that that's within my prerogatives. I run the business end of the Navy, and the military strategy, I think, should go to the people that are best qualified to do that. I've got my own ideas what they will do, what they should do, but I'm sure they're only amateur suggestions, and I wouldn't want to make that.
Well, Mr. Secretary, you're here in New York tonight, I believe, for the happy purpose of laying a keel for a new aircraft carrier tomorrow.
That's good.
I believe that there's nothing that gladdens the Navy's heart any more than building a new carrier. Is that correct, sir?
Well, I don't think it should only gladden the Navy's heart, Mr. Huie. I think it should gladden the country's heart, because I think the aircraft carriers that we will have on the sea are the greatest deterrent to aggression that anybody can get. Those are air bases that we can send where we want and bring home when we want, and strike at the mortal soul of our enemy if they decide to
Well,
fight.
this carrier is one of the new so-called super carriers, the Forrestal class carrier, isn't it?
It's a new larger carrier than the ones we had before. We don't have any super carriers. We have larger carriers because we have heavier airplanes, faster airplanes that have to consume much more fuel. They have to range many more miles.
Well, how big a tonnage are these carriers, the new ones? How do they compare with the, say, the Essex class that are now operating?
I don't think anybody ever weighed a carrier.
But they have ways of differentiating one carrier from another, don't they?
As I remember, and I shouldn't be quoted directly, but of course in this position I have to be, I think the Essex type class carrier is about 30,000 tons, and this carrier is around 50,000 tons.
Well, how much do these carriers cost apiece?
About $200 million.
Well, sir, our viewers remember, I'm sure, something about a former Secretary of Defense stopping construction of one of these carriers. Now, is this the type of carrier on which construction was once halted?
It isn't exactly the same. It's very similar to it. I'm sure that Secretary of Defense made a mistake, and I'm sure if he had to do over again, he wouldn't do it the same way.
Now, why is it necessary to build carriers so much larger? Are all the carriers, for instance, in our mothball fleet, are they obsolescent now?
They will be obsolescent. Those carriers were laid down, were designed before the war. They were built during the war. Since then, we have built airplanes that are faster, heavier, much more speed, much more armament on them, that will fly many miles more in range and carry much more load of destruction for the enemy. So it's essential that we have landing fields that will handle them on the sea. Now, I might say to you that in 1939 you only had a very few airfields in this country that were as long as 4,500 feet. Now you have over 500 that are longer than that, and you have 200 more that are longer than 6,500 feet. If you have to extend the runways on the ground, we must do something about the runways on the sea.
How long are the runways on these new carriers? Is that still a military secret, or?
No, they're, we call them a 1,000-mile airstrip because they can be within 24 hours in a range of 1,000 miles. Actually, they're about 900 feet long, a little over 900 feet long.
Well, sir, now, the carriers are one of the things that there has been a great deal of controversy over. Our viewers, I'm sure, I'm sure that our viewers would like to know, is it still a controversial subject in the Defense Department?
I don't think it is. I don't think it is. I think in the Defense Department, after we got over our first growing pains a few years ago, that we're pulling pretty well together. I don't know of any two finer people I could work with than Tom Finletter and Frank Pace, and our two bosses, Bob Lovett and Bill Foster. We have many arguments. We solve them in the privacy of our office, and we don't solve them in the public prints.
Well, Mr. Secretary, one of the arguments against these big carriers was that it was putting too many eggs in one basket, so to speak, that they cost $200 million apiece, and they might be sunk by the torpedoes from one submarine or a lucky torpedo from an airplane. Now, what is the answer to that contention?
Let me answer it for you in a rather old-fashioned way. The Saratoga that we're going to lay the keel on tomorrow is the sixth ship to be named the Saratoga. The last one was the Old Sarah. It was launched in 1925. It required the ripe old age of 21 years. It had a lot of submarines hit it. It had a lot of kamikazes hit it. It finally died of old age because it didn't do enough for the job, but there it was for 21 years, roamed all the Pacific seas. I think that's a fair enough answer.
Well, Mr. Secretary, to discuss a little something like politics for a moment. You've been on the political side of the Navy, and I wonder if the Navy has any apprehension over the fact that the next president is going to be an Army general. Is that causing anybody in the Navy to lose any sleep these nights?
Not at all. Not at all. The Defense Department, since I've known it, has been non-political. We have never had dictation from anybody on where to place our contracts, on what to do from any political sense.
Well, now, what about the...
carried on, I'm sure it will continue to be.
What about the budgetary position of the Navy now? Is the Navy getting less money, for instance? It's getting considerably less than the Air Force now, isn't it?
Yes, I think they should. I think they should.
And what about the Army, relative to the Army? Is it getting less than the Army or more than the Army?
Well, last year I think we got about the same, maybe a little less.
Well, now what...
we have husbanded our resources very well for the last 40 years, and we take care of our things pretty well, and we want what we reasonably need, and the Congress, since I've been there, has given it to us, and I'm sure they've given it to the Army and the Air Force.
What about...
Well, I saw that General Eisenhower praised the spirit of unification in Korea. What do you think now of the situation regarding unification?
Unification is all right. It's going along pretty well. We have some growing pains in there. We have to do something about the... you've got three services that are strong people in all those services. They feel very strongly about the superiority of their service. And I'm sure if you didn't have that, you wouldn't have good military people.
Well, do you think unification should go any further than it has gone, or do you think it's reached about the point of completion, so to speak?
I don't think you're ever going to finish growing. I think that we have some things in the Defense Department we all realize that we can all do better. And I'm sure that all of us in the Defense Department, the secretaries will all be leaving next month. We will tell our successors what we think can be improved, and we'll leave it to them to do what best they can with it. I know they will improve it.
Mr. Secretary, our viewers, of course, know that we now maintain a very large fleet, naval complement in the Mediterranean. Now, sir, why do we keep a big Navy in the Mediterranean now?
Mr. Huie, those long gray ships, those are the precision tools of diplomacy. When people see them, I'm sure they don't want to fight with us. Our enemies don't want to fight. When our friends see them, it lends them great confidence, because they're out there in force that if we have an aggressor that will strike at us, they will be ready to retaliate very swiftly and with great effect.
So our Navy's being in the Mediterranean is part of our deterrent effort against our potential enemy.
And they're always ready to go anyplace else that anyone would call them, because we support them from the United States completely.
Well, as a final question, sir, we have, of course, among our viewers, there are many Navy people and many Navy families. So I'm sure that our viewers would like your answer to this, sir. Is the Navy in a stronger position today and better able to discharge its functions than it was at the beginning of the Korean War?
Very much so, Mr. Huie, and we have to be, because we have the largest Navy in the world, but we've taken on many more responsibilities that we have to discharge. And I wish we could do it for half of what it's costing us, but we're doing pretty well, and I'm sure we need what we have.
And what is the state of morale?
Mr. Foster, the Deputy Secretary of Defense, came back from Korea the other day, and he said, the Koreans all said to him, our morale is very good. The morale of the Navy is fine. It always will be, and also of the Army and the Air Force.
Well, I'm sure that our viewers have enjoyed this visit with you, sir, and thank you for being with us.
It's a great pleasure.
The opinions you've heard our speakers express tonight are entirely their own. The editorial board for this edition of the Longines Chronoscope was Mr. William Bradford Huie and Mr. Henry Hazlitt. Our distinguished guest was Mr. Dan A. Kimball, Secretary of the Navy. Falling snow, carolers in quaint costumes to remind us of other Longines Christmases over the years. Friends, you know, it was the success of Longines watches in early World's Fair competitions that started Longines on the road to world fame. As Longines watches won one grand prize after another, great people all over the world had to own this celebrated watch. The Sultans of Turkey, the Mandarins of China, the Grand Dukes of Central Europe, the Maharajas of India, and the millionaires of America. Christmas 1952 presents another picture. A Longines watch is within the reach of almost all, and each Longines watch of today is individually worthy of the 10 World's Fair grand prizes and 28 gold medal awards for which Longines watches are world famous. And this Christmas 1952, you may buy and proudly give a Longines watch for as little as $71.50. Throughout the world, no other name on a Christmas watch means so much as Longines, the world's most honored watch, premier product of the Longines Whitnall Watch Company, since 1866, maker of watches of the highest character. We invite you to join us every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday evening at this same time for the Longines Chronoscope, a television journal of important issues of the hour, broadcast on behalf of Longines, the world's most honored watch, and Whitnall, distinguished companion to the world-honored Longines. This is David Ross, speaking for your regular host, Frank Knight, and reminding you that Longines and Whitnall watches are sold and serviced from coast to coast by more than 4,000 leading jewelers who proudly display this emblem, Agency for Longines Whitnall Watches.
It's fun, the Red Button Show on the CBS television network.